My name is Miguel. I'm 42 years old, although if you look into my eyes, you'd probably guess 50. Life ages you when it carries too much. And I have carried things no man should ever have to carry. But here I am, breathing. That's already something. I was born in Aleppo. For those who don't know where that is, it's a city in Syria. Or it was, because the Aleppo I knew no longer exists. The streets where I learned to ride a bike, the market where my mother bought spices on Friday mornings, the school where I met Rami, my best friend since the age of 7, my father-in-law's bakery that smelled of anise and cardamom from 5 in the morning. All of that is rubble now, dust and rubble. I want you to understand something before you keep reading. I didn't want to leave. I never wanted to leave. People think you emigrate because you want adventure, because you're bored, because you're looking for easy money. No, I had my life there. I had a hardware store I inherited from my father. I had a house with a lemon tree in the yard. I had Hannah, my wife, who made the best kibbeh in the neighborhood, and I had my 2 children, Kareem, 9 years old, and little Noor, who was barely 5 at the time. I had everything a man needs to be happy, everything. And then, the war began. At first, you think wars are for other people. You hear the bombings far away. You see the smoke on the horizon, and you convince yourself it's not going to reach your street. That your neighborhood is protected for some reason you can't explain. You repeat it to yourself like a prayer. It won't reach here. It won't reach here. It reaches. The first missile that fell near our house was on a Tuesday. It was 3 in the afternoon. Kareem was doing his homework at the kitchen table, and Noor was taking a nap. The ground shook as if the whole earth was shaking off something it didn't want to carry. The window glass in the living room exploded inward. Hannah was in that living room. I ran toward her, screaming her name. I found her on the floor, covered in glass, with a cut on her forehead that bled a lot, but, thank God, wasn't deep. I held her on the floor while the children cried from their rooms. The 4 of us stayed there holding each other in the hallway for I don't know how long, trembling, without speaking. That night, for the first time, Hannah looked at me and said quietly, as if she was afraid the words would become real if she said them too loud, "Miguel, we have to leave." I didn't answer her. I got up, went to the bathroom, turned on the tap, and cried with my head under the water so she wouldn't hear me. But you don't leave from one day to the next. You endure. You endure because you have roots, because you have your parents, because you have a life built brick by brick over the years. My parents were elderly. My father was 71 years old with an operated knee that no longer allowed him to walk fast. My mother had a heart condition. How do you tell your parents you're leaving and you don't know if you'll ever see them again? How do you do that to them? We endured 8 more months. 8 months of sleeping with our shoes on in case we had to run. 8 months of sending the children to the neighbor's basement every time the sirens went off. 8 months of queuing for drinking water, rationing bread, watching the neighborhood slowly empty out because those who had money or family abroad had already left. What made me decide was, one afternoon in October, I was in the hardware store, which by then had almost no customers, trying to take inventory of what little was left. The baker's son came running in, a 16-year-old boy named Yusuf, his face completely white. He told me they had bombed the school in the next neighborhood, that there were children, that there were many children. I closed the hardware store. I started walking there without really knowing why. When I arrived, I couldn't get very close because people were pushing and the rubble blocked the street. But I saw enough. I saw enough for those images to never leave me. I saw a man pull a child from the debris with his hands. Just with his hands, no tools, clawing at the concrete. The child wasn't moving. I went home. I told Hannah, "We're leaving." The night before we left, I didn't sleep. I sat beside the bed where the children were sleeping and watched them for hours. Kareem slept face down as always, with his arm hanging off the edge of the bed. Noor had her stuffed bear pressed against her chest. I thought, what kind of father am I failing them by staying? And what kind of son am I if I leave? At dawn, I went to my parents' house. My mother already knew. Mothers always know. She had prepared a bag of food for me to take. Dry bread, dates, cheese wrapped in newspaper. She put it in my hands without saying anything. Then she took my face in both her hands, looked me straight in the eyes for a long moment and said, "Take care of my grandchildren." Nothing more. Take care of my grandchildren. I hugged my father. It was the first time I had seen him cry since his brother died 20 years earlier. That man who had worked his whole life with his hands, who never complained about anything, who said men don't cry, was crying without any shame, his whole body shaking. I held him tight. He smelled of his usual cologne, that cheap cologne he had worn since I could remember. I held onto that smell. That was the last time I saw my parents. The journey was hell. I'm not going to dress that up with pretty words because it doesn't deserve them. We paid almost everything we had saved to a man who told us he knew the way. There were 27 of us. Families, young people alone, a woman 7 months pregnant who walked without ever complaining and who made me deeply ashamed every time I thought about complaining myself. We walked at night. We hid during the day. We crossed the border between Turkey and Greece in a rubber dinghy at 2 in the morning, with the sea black and cold and 27 people crammed into a space that wasn't meant for more than 12. Karim was pressed against my side, silent, with a seriousness on his face that didn't belong to a 9-year-old boy. Noor was in Hana's arms with her eyes closed. I don't know if she was sleeping, or if she had simply decided not to look. The dinghy took on water halfway across. I don't want to go into detail about those minutes. I'll only say that the man in front of me was a doctor from Damascus named Faris. He had a backpack of medicines he carried with him for whatever might happen. When the dinghy started sinking on one side, Fares dropped that backpack into the sea without hesitating for a second so it would weigh less. Years of career, scarce medicines he had obtained with great difficulty, all at the bottom of the Aegean. He didn't even blink. We reached Lesbos. When I stepped on land, I fell to my knees. It wasn't dramatic or calculated. I fell because my legs simply wouldn't hold me anymore. What came next were months of camps, of forms, of waiting, of small humiliations that accumulate until they're no longer small. We slept in tents with 4 other families. We queued for hours to eat. The children didn't go to school. Karim, who had always been a curious and talkative boy, grew quieter and quieter. Noor started wetting the bed at night, something she hadn't done since she was 2. There was one night, in the camp in Athens, when Hana and I argued. One of those ugly arguments, the kind that hurt, the kind where you say things you don't want to say. We were both broken, we were both scared, and when you're like that, the easiest thing is to hurt the person closest to you. That night, when the children fell asleep, I slipped out of the tent and sat outside in the cold. I stared at the sky for a long time. I asked myself if it had been worth it, if it wouldn't have been better to stay, if my parents were okay, if the hardware store was still standing, if the lemon tree in the yard had survived the bombings. Then I thought about Karim and Noor sleeping inside, and I answered myself. We arrived in Germany 17 months after leaving Aleppo. 17 months. In that time, I aged 10 years, lost 8 kilos and buried inside myself things I don't know if I'll ever be able to unbury. Germany was hard in a different way, a different kind of hardness, colder, more bureaucratic. Learning the language, finding work, understanding how everything works, feeling invisible to some people and too visible to others. There were people who looked at us with suspicion, who crossed the street when they saw us, who talked about us under their breath thinking we didn't notice. But there was also a woman named Brigitte, a volunteer with an association, who taught Karim German for months without charging anything, who brought him books, who one day arrived with a box of colored pencils for Noor and spent 2 hours drawing with her at the table in our reception room. Those things exist too. You can't forget them. Today I work in a distribution warehouse. It's not my father's hardware store. It doesn't smell of metal and machine oil like that one did, but it's honest work and I do it well. Kareem is 14 now and speaks German better than I do. He wants to be an engineer. Noor no longer wets the bed. She draws all the time, fills entire notebooks with drawings, and when you ask her what she's drawing, she sometimes says she's drawing Syria the way it was before. The way I describe it to her when I talk about home. I didn't hear from my parents for almost 2 years. 2 years during which every night I fell asleep not knowing if they were alive. Then, through a cousin who had made it to Sweden, I got a phone number. I called. My mother answered. I couldn't say anything for the first minute. I just listened to her voice. Just that. Her voice saying, "Miguel, son, you're alive." I still can't go back. They're still there, in what's left of Aleppo, in an apartment that isn't theirs because theirs no longer exists. I talk to them when I can, when the connection allows it. My mother always ends the call the same way, with the same words. Take care of my grandchildren. I do, Mom. I do every day. When people ask me if I regret having left, I don't know what to answer. It's not a question with a simple answer. I regret having had to leave. I regret that my country put me in that situation. I regret every kilometer of distance between my children and their grandparents. But I don't regret having saved them. That's the only thing I know for certain. The only thing that holds me up when the weight becomes too much. Kareem wants to be an engineer. Noor draws Syria in colors. That's enough. It has to be enough.